Welcome to the channel.
I don't know if I'll ever get any real peace from this, but I'm hoping just sharing it will help a little. My name's Matt, I'm an architect, and for years, my life was damn near picture perfect. Then I found out my wife Judy was having an affair with her boss, James. It's been a wild ride since that discovery, and I'll tell you everything, step by step. Let me start at the beginning though, so it all makes sense. Judy and I had been together since college, built our lives together, and I thought she was as committed to our marriage as I was. We had good careers, a great home, and were even talking about starting a family. All that time, I thought she had my back just like I had hers. Then one day, she started acting off. Nothing crazy at first, just little things. She'd be glued to her phone, and sometimes she'd have this strange, distant look on her face. I pushed the thoughts away, told myself I was just imagining things. But it only got worse. She'd make up excuses to go out late, had work emergencies, and was constantly talking about this guy James, her boss. You know that feeling when everything seems fine, but your gut tells you it isn't? I should have trusted my gut. I finally got my answer a few months later, and it was exactly what I feared. Judy was having an affair with James. Caught her red-handed with texts on her phone when she'd left it out while taking a shower. I just stared at those messages, numb. When she got out of the bathroom, I confronted her, and at first, she tried to deny it. Then she broke down, blaming the usual stuff, I didn't feel appreciated, he just listened to me. All that nonsense. I was furious, but I didn't scream or cry. I wanted her to feel the weight of her decision, so I told her we were done. I didn't want to waste any more time on someone who couldn't be loyal. Then, to twist the knife, I encouraged her to go ahead and marry James. Let her live out her little fantasy with him. I knew it wouldn't last. People like James, they're not loyal, they just like the thrill. For a while, I thought I was handling it well. I even convinced myself that pushing her into that new life was my final move, my way of teaching her what betrayal felt like. But years later, things took a turn I didn't expect. That's just the beginning though. There's so much more to this story. Let me know if you want to hear the rest. So, after the divorce, I washed my hands of Judy. She married James within a year, which was quicker than I expected. I tried not to keep tabs on her, but you know how it is, word gets around. Friends, mutual connections, they'd let things slip here and there. Turns out, James wasn't the charming, caring guy she built him up to be. Apparently, he was controlling, short-tempered, and prone to outbursts. In a weird way, it felt like justice. I had this sense of satisfaction, knowing she was dealing with exactly the type of person she chose over me. At least, that's what I told myself every time I heard about their fights or her looking worn out and miserable. I figured, well, this is what she wanted, right? Judy's dad, Captain Ray, stayed in my life even after the divorce. He was this tough-as-nails Navy vet, a real straight shooter, and he didn't mince words when he heard about what Judy had done. He was disappointed in her, to say the least, but I could tell he cared about her no matter what. He never stopped visiting me, checking in, and sometimes he'd even update me on Judy, mostly out of habit. I never thought much of it. Then one day, Captain Ray called me out of the blue, sounding pretty shaken. He told me that Judy had been hospitalized after an incident with James. I asked him straight up what happened, and he admitted that James had been abusive. My heart sank. It's one thing to know someone betrayed you, it's another to hear they're suffering in a way no one deserves. Ray practically begged me to intervene, saying he thought I was the only person who could help her. Part of me wanted to tell him, this is what she chose, but he pressed on, saying something that stuck with me. Matt, I know you wanted her to see the consequences, but don't you think it's gone far enough? I couldn't argue with that. I didn't jump into action right away. I took a few days to think it over, trying to sort out my feelings. Part of me felt justified, like Judy was getting exactly what she deserved after what she put me through. But every time I replayed Captain Ray's words in my head, don't you think it's gone far enough? I felt this heavy sense of guilt creeping in. Yeah, I wanted her to face consequences, but I never imagined it would come to this. After some back and forth in my mind, I finally agreed to meet Judy. I was tense as hell, didn't know what to expect. When I walked into that hospital room though, I was hit by a wave of emotions I didn't see coming. She looked completely different, no trace of the confident, carefree woman I once knew. Her face was bruised, her eyes dull and sunken. She couldn't even look me in the eye. For a minute, we just sat there in silence. Then finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Matt, I know you probably don't want to be here, and I don't blame you." She wasn't wrong, but seeing her like that made me feel something I hadn't felt in years: pity. I wanted to hate her, to hold on to that anger, but it just wasn't there. All I could think about was the girl I'd loved and trusted, now trapped in this mess of her own making. I told her that her dad was worried about her and that I was there to help, if she was ready to leave James for good. She didn't answer at first, just stared at her hands, but eventually she nodded, almost like she didn't believe she deserved the help. It took everything I had to keep myself together, but I told her I'd get her a lawyer, someone who could help her get out of this nightmare. That was the start of something I never expected, a slow, strange reconciliation, built on nothing but shared pain and regret. And that was just the beginning. Once Judy agreed to leave James, things moved fast. I found her a lawyer, someone who knew how to handle these messy divorces, especially with the abuse element involved. I'll admit, part of me hoped this would be quick and clean, just let her end things with James and be done with it. But of course, it didn't turn out that way. James fought back hard. He didn't want to let her go and did everything he could to keep control, throwing accusations, threats, and dragging things out in court. Judy was terrified. Every time I saw her, she looked smaller, like he was sucking the life out of her bit by bit. But she kept pushing forward, and so did I, even when it got exhausting. I guess, in a weird way, I felt responsible for what she was going through. Then one night, she called me. Her voice was shaky, and I could barely understand her through the sobs. She'd gone back to her apartment after a long day of meetings with her lawyer, and there, sitting on her doorstep, were the journals she thought she'd lost years ago. Turns out, James had been holding on to them, using them to keep a grip on her. But instead of throwing them out, she read through them. And what she found in those pages broke her. She asked if I'd come over, saying there was something I needed to see. I'll admit, I was hesitant, but curiosity got the best of me. When I arrived, she handed me one of the journals, her hands trembling. I opened it, and there in her own handwriting, was a whole different side of the story. She wrote about the affair, how it started, why she fell for James, but also the guilt and regret that plagued her. She described this deep confusion, a sense of being trapped between what she thought she wanted and what she knew was right. And then, line after line, she poured out this raw, painful longing to go back, to undo everything, to somehow win back my trust. Reading those pages, I felt a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of empathy. She wasn't trying to justify herself, she was just laying it all out. And for the first time, I saw her as someone who'd made a terrible mistake and paid dearly for it, not just to James but to herself. I closed the journal, looked up at her, and asked, "Why didn't you tell me any of this back then?" She just shook her head, saying she didn't know how. That night, something shifted between us. It was like we both finally understood that the pain ran deep on both sides. It didn't make things right, but it opened the door to something I didn't expect, maybe, just maybe, a path toward forgiveness. After that night, Judy and I started talking more openly than we ever had before. It was strange, being so close to someone who had hurt me deeply, but somehow finding common ground in all the regret. She'd tell me about her life with James, how everything that seemed exciting at first turned toxic over time. How he'd gradually isolated her from friends, kept her in check with manipulation, and eventually violence. She admitted that in some twisted way, she'd stayed with him, thinking she deserved this kind of treatment. I could tell that getting her out of this mess wouldn't be quick, and I knew it would mean seeing her regularly, whether I liked it or not. She still needed help, legally and emotionally, so I stayed in the picture, helping her coordinate things, meeting her lawyers, and showing up as support in court. Captain Ray, her dad, was always close by too, watching over her with this silent, unbreakable strength. We all kept pushing forward, determined to break the hold James had on her life. One day, Judy handed me another journal, this time, an entry written just after our divorce. In it, she'd poured out everything, describing how empty and aimless she felt after she realized what she'd lost. "I thought I'd be happier without him," she wrote, "but I was wrong. Every time I see him, it's like I'm looking at the life I threw away. And I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for it." Those words hit me hard. I never thought she'd had any real remorse, but here it was, plain as day. I guess I'd convinced myself that she'd moved on without a second thought, but reading her regret in her own handwriting made it clear that wasn't the case. This wasn't some act, she really felt the weight of her choices. Eventually, I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked her, "Judy, why did you do it? Why, James?" She sighed, struggling for words, before finally saying, "I thought I needed something different, something that made me feel alive, I guess. But I didn't realize how much I'd be destroying in the process." I won't lie, hearing her admit that was painful, but it also felt like a release. All the questions that had kept me up at night were finally being answered, one by one. It didn't erase the hurt, but it softened it a little. And strange as it sounds, I began to feel a sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, letting go of my anger was the only way to truly move forward. As we pushed forward with the divorce proceedings against James, things got uglier. He'd show up in court with that same smug look he'd probably worn when he first swept Judy off her feet. But now, she couldn't even look him in the eye, and I could see the shame and fear written all over her face every time he walked into the room. The way he'd glare at her, the smirk he'd flash in my direction, it took everything I had not to get up and knock him down a peg. Judy was shaken every time we left the courthouse, and even though I'd promised myself I'd keep things strictly about helping her get out, I found myself stepping up to support her emotionally. I'd tell her to hold her head up, remind her that she was doing the right thing. And she'd look at me with this mix of gratitude and guilt, like she couldn't believe I was still standing by her side after everything. One afternoon, after a particularly rough court hearing, we went for coffee to unwind. She opened up more about her time with James, how he'd preyed on her insecurities, made her feel like she wasn't enough on her own, and convinced her that he was the only person who could make her feel worthy. Hearing that made me see her differently. I realized that maybe she'd been manipulated long before she ever crossed that line with him. She'd been searching for something, and James had been all too eager to take advantage of that. "You know, Matt," she said, staring down at her coffee, "I don't expect you to ever forgive me. I don't think I deserve it. I want you to know that if I could take it all back, I would." I nodded, trying to find the right words. "Judy, I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forget what happened. But maybe forgiving isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about accepting it and choosing to move forward anyway." She looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her yet, but in that moment, something shifted. I'd spent years holding on to my anger, using it as a shield to protect myself from the pain. But sitting there with Judy, seeing her as someone who'd been broken down by her own choices and by James's manipulation, I realized that maybe holding on to the anger was doing more harm than good. It felt like the first step toward letting go. After that coffee, things between Judy and me changed. We started talking more, sometimes even laughing like we used to before everything fell apart. I'd find myself staying a little longer after court sessions, and we'd talk about things outside of James or the divorce. It was strange, comforting, even. But I kept reminding myself that I wasn't doing this to rekindle anything. I was there to help her break free from the mess she'd gotten herself into. Then one day, she asked if I'd join her for dinner with her dad, Captain Ray. She said he wanted to thank me for helping her through all this. It felt weird at first, but I owed him a lot, so I agreed. The dinner was simple, just the three of us in Ray's small kitchen. He was a straightforward man, the type who rarely showed emotion, but he looked at me that night with a kind of respect I hadn't seen before. Over the meal, he raised his glass and said, "Matt, I know my daughter put you through hell, and you had every right to walk away. But you didn't. And for that, you have my respect, and my gratitude." Hearing those words hit me harder than I expected. I felt this weight lift, like the years of anger and bitterness had finally started to fade. Judy's eyes filled with tears, and she gave me this small hesitant smile. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel resentment when I looked at her. Later that night, after Ray went to bed, Judy and I sat on the porch. She opened up even more, talking about how lost she'd felt, how the thrill of something new had blinded her to what really mattered. She kept saying she was sorry over and over, like she was trying to convince herself that she could somehow make things right. I told her to stop apologizing. Hearing it all just once was enough. I looked out into the night and told her, "Judy, I think it's time to let go of the past. Maybe for both of us." I didn't know exactly what I meant by that, but it felt right. She nodded, looking relieved, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. And that's when I realized that forgiving her wasn't just about making peace with what she'd done, it was about freeing myself from the weight of it too. That night, as I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Maybe this was the start of something better, something that didn't involve resentment or regret. Maybe, finally, we could both find a way forward. The next few weeks passed, and Judy's divorce from James was nearing its end. Each court session brought her closer to freedom, and each time, she looked a little stronger. I didn't expect it, but seeing her break free of James's control felt like a win for both of us. One afternoon, right after the last court hearing, Judy asked if I could come by her place to help move some of James's leftover things out. I agreed, figuring it would be a good way to close this chapter. When I arrived, her place looked different, cleaner, brighter, like she'd started reclaiming it as her own. We spent hours boxing up his stuff, barely talking, just working side by side in comfortable silence. As we wrapped up, Judy took a deep breath and handed me one last journal she'd kept hidden all these years. She said she wanted me to read it, but only if I wanted to. "It's my way of letting you see everything," she said. "Everything I couldn't tell you back then." That night, I sat in my living room and opened the journal. The entries started off innocent enough. Small doubts, her feeling unfulfilled, questioning herself and her choices. But as the pages went on, I saw how James had slowly drawn her in, playing on her insecurities, making her feel like she needed him to feel alive. She wrote about how he'd convince her that their affair was justified, that I'd never understand her the way he did. And then, as her guilt started to seep in, she described the shame that followed, this haunting feeling that she'd thrown everything away. She even wrote about moments where she almost ended things with him, times when she felt so close to telling me the truth but couldn't bring herself to do it. And then, on the last page, there was a line that stopped me cold. I thought I'd lost Matt for good, but a part of me still wishes he could see that I never stopped loving him. I closed the journal, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. After all this time, she still had feelings for me, but it was too late to undo what had happened. I couldn't just forget the pain she'd caused, but reading her words made me realize that maybe she really was trying to make things right. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about forgiveness, about what it would mean to really let go of everything and move forward. I didn't know what that looked like yet, but I knew one thing: this journey wasn't over for either of us. After reading that last journal, something shifted. I kept replaying that line in my head: I never stopped loving him. It was hard to believe after all the pain she'd caused, but a part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, she meant it. A few days later, Judy called, asking if we could meet up to talk. I was hesitant, but I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop, one we used to go to all the time when we were still together. The place hadn't changed, but we had. I could tell she was nervous, her hands shaking a little as she stirred her coffee. "Matt," she started, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I know it's selfish to even ask, but I just need you to know that. If I could go back, I would never make those choices again. I was lost, and I know I hurt you more than I could ever make up for." I just looked at her, feeling a strange calmness. I told her about the journal and how reading it had made me realize something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. "Judy," I said, "I think you need to stop punishing yourself. We both have to let go of what happened, or neither of us will ever move on." She nodded, looking down, and then out of nowhere she asked, "Do you think there's any chance you could ever be happy for me? I mean, if I ever find a way to be happy again?" Her question surprised me, but I thought about it for a moment. I realized that, despite everything, I wanted that for her. Maybe that was part of forgiving her, hoping she could find peace, even if it was a peace I couldn't give her. "Yeah, Judy," I said, "I think I can. I want you to be happy. I want us both to be happy." She looked up at me, relief and gratitude in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt the anger fade completely. It was replaced by something else, a quiet acceptance, a sense of finally closing a chapter that had haunted us both. As we left the coffee shop, I knew that this was a turning point. It didn't mean we'd be close friends or that we'd go back to the way things were. But it did mean we were both finally free. Free to move forward, to let go, and to find a future that wasn't defined by pain or betrayal. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter. One where maybe we could both find peace. After that talk, I tried to settle back into my life, focusing on work and keeping my mind on other things. But it wasn't as easy as I thought. Closing that chapter with Judy felt like a weight off my shoulders, but it left this strange emptiness, like I was starting all over again from scratch. For so long, the anger had been a part of me, like some armor I carried around. And now that it was gone, I felt exposed. Then one afternoon, Captain Ray called me up. He'd invited me out to his fishing cabin before, but I'd always turned him down, mostly to avoid any more reminders of Judy. But this time, I agreed. I figured a weekend out in the open would be a good distraction. The cabin was quiet, tucked away by a lake with no one around for miles. Ray was waiting on the porch, a cooler full of cold beers, and he greeted me with a nod, no questions or awkward conversations, just an unspoken understanding that I was here to get away. We spent the afternoon fishing, talking about everything but Judy, reminiscing over old stories, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like myself again. Just Matt, not Matt who got cheated on, not Matt with a grudge. Later that evening, we sat by a fire Ray had started, watching the sun set over the lake. Out of the blue, Ray finally brought her up. "Look, Matt," he said, staring at the flames, "I know she did wrong by you. And I know it'll take a lifetime for her to forgive herself. But you," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you've got a chance now. You've done right by her, and that says a lot about you. You don't have to keep punishing yourself for it, you know." I didn't say much at first. Just took in what he said. I knew he was right. I'd done my part, done more than most people would, and it was time to let go. For real this time. But there was still something gnawing at me, something I hadn't told anyone. "Ray," I finally said, "I don't know how to move forward. It's like I don't know who I am without this anger. It's been with me so long, it's like I don't even know what comes next." He just nodded, understanding in his steady way, then said, "What comes next is whatever you want it to be. You gave her forgiveness. Maybe it's time to give yourself some too." That line stuck with me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding myself responsible, like if I'd been a different kind of husband, if I'd been more exciting or attentive, she wouldn't have turned to someone else. Logically, I knew it wasn't my fault. But emotionally, I guess I'd never let myself off the hook. The next morning, Ray and I went for another round of fishing, quieter this time, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we packed up to leave, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's time to get back out there, Matt. Time to start living your life again." It sounds simple, but those words were the push I needed. When I got back home, I started taking small steps. I reached out to friends I hadn't talked to in ages, started going to gatherings I'd been avoiding. Slowly, I started building a new routine, one that didn't revolve around regrets or what-ifs. A few months later, Captain Ray called with some surprising news. Judy had met someone. His name was Ben, a stable, straightforward guy, nothing flashy, no power trips, just a good man who treated her with respect. Ray told me he'd met Ben and thought highly of him. Judy seemed genuinely happy, and I could hear in Ray's voice that he was relieved, maybe even proud. I sat with that news for a while, trying to figure out how I felt. Strangely, I felt a sense of relief, like this chapter was truly, finally closed. Maybe this was what she needed all along, and if she'd found some peace, then so had I. One weekend, Ray invited me over to meet Ben. At first, I thought, what's the point? But a part of me wanted to see for myself that Judy had moved on, that we were both finally free of the mess we'd made. So I agreed. When I walked into Ray's living room, there she was, sitting beside this new guy. Ben looked like the exact opposite of James, calm, unassuming, with a genuine smile. Judy looked at me, nervous at first, but when I smiled, she relaxed, and the tension seemed to evaporate. Ben extended his hand. "I've heard a lot about you, Matt. Thanks for coming." I shook his hand, and something unexpected happened. I felt a sense of peace, a real sense of closure. We chatted, easy and light, and for the first time, I saw Judy truly happy. It wasn't with me, and it wasn't meant to be with me anymore. But it felt good to see her like that, to know she'd found a way to move forward too. After that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Not just from Judy, but from the pain, the bitterness, the regret. It was over. All of it. And for the first time in years, I knew that I could start looking forward again. In the weeks after meeting Ben, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd gone through with Judy. I thought about forgiveness, about how it had changed me, and how, despite everything, it had been the only way for me to finally move forward. It was strange, but I no longer felt the anger or bitterness that used to grip me. Instead, I felt something like gratitude, not for what happened, but for what I'd learned from it all. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting alone in a park I used to go to with Judy back in the day. I hadn't been there in years, but something drew me back. Maybe it was a way of revisiting those memories one last time, of letting them go for good. I watched families playing, couples strolling hand in hand, and a thought struck me: I still had time to start over. I still had a chance to build something new, something real. The past didn't have to define me anymore. A few weeks later, I met someone. Her name was Claire. We met at a friend's dinner party, one of those casual get-togethers I'd usually avoid. But that night I went, figuring it was time to take Ray's advice and start putting myself out there again. Claire was different from Judy in almost every way, quiet, thoughtful, with this calm presence that seemed to put everyone around her at ease. We talked for hours that night, finding common ground over books, architecture, and old movies. There was no rush, no wild excitement, just a slow, comfortable connection that felt natural. We started meeting up for coffee, then dinners, then long walks through the city. For the first time, I felt something genuine and unforced, and I realized that I was ready to let someone in again. One night, after months of dating, I told Claire everything. I'd been hesitant, not wanting to scare her off with my messy past, but she deserved the truth. I told her about Judy, about the betrayal, about how it had broken me and how I'd clung to the bitterness for years. I told her how I'd finally come to forgive, not just Judy, but myself, and how that had set me free. Claire listened, never interrupting, her hand resting lightly on mine. When I finished, she looked at me with a soft smile and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." She didn't press me with questions or ask for details. She just accepted me, flaws and all. In that moment, I knew I'd found someone special, someone who saw me for who I was, scars and all, and still chose to stay. Over time, Claire and I grew closer. She met Captain Ray, and he took to her immediately, calling me up after to tell me I'd finally found myself a good one. My friends saw a change in me too, one they'd quietly hoped for. I wasn't just getting by anymore, I was finally living. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find a letter in the mail. It was from Judy. She hadn't contacted me since the day we met Ben, and honestly, I didn't expect to hear from her again. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. In the letter, Judy thanked me. She thanked me for helping her through the divorce, for standing by her when she didn't deserve it, and most importantly, for forgiving her. She wrote, "I hope you know that your forgiveness saved me, Matt. It helped me believe that I could rebuild my life, that I could be a better person. I hope you found happiness, you deserve it." It was a short letter, no more than a page, but it was exactly what I needed. I folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. The chapter was officially over. With Claire, I started building something new. We talked about the future, about our dreams, and slowly, I started letting myself dream too. I'd been so focused on the past that I'd forgotten how much life I still had ahead of me. Claire showed me that I could build a life filled with trust, laughter, and respect, things I thought I'd lost forever. One night, as we sat on my porch watching the stars, I looked over at her and realized I was ready. Ready to let go completely, to start again. I took her hand and simply said, "Thank you, Claire. For being here, for everything." She squeezed my hand, leaned her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "I wouldn't be anywhere else." For the first time in years, I felt something I thought was lost for good, hope. Hope for a future I could create, a future I could be proud of. And I knew deep down that I'd finally found my peace. Claire and I kept building on that hope, slowly and naturally, like two people who'd been searching for something real and had finally found it. Every day with her felt like another small step forward. It was different from what I had with Judy, deeper, simpler, with this steady warmth that didn't need any grand gestures or drama. We were just there for each other, and after all I'd been through, that felt like a miracle in itself. One night, about a year into our relationship, we went out to a quiet little restaurant by the river, one of Claire's favorite spots. She loved the way the lights reflected on the water, the peacefulness of it, and honestly, so did I. We were talking about our week, making each other laugh over silly stories from work, when she looked at me and said, "Matt, have you ever thought about, well, what you want for the future?" I paused, feeling a slight pang of fear mixed with excitement. It was something I'd been thinking about for months now, but I hadn't brought it up, maybe because part of me was still afraid to fully commit to the idea of a future after everything that had happened. But sitting there, looking at her, I realized I wanted a future with her, more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. "Yeah," I finally said, looking down at my hands before meeting her eyes again. "I think about it a lot, actually. And I want that future with you, Claire." Her face softened, and she took my hand, her thumb gently tracing circles on my knuckles. "I want that too, Matt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We spent the rest of the evening talking about what we wanted our lives to look like together. Quiet mornings, travel plans, a home filled with love and laughter. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to share my life with someone who respected me, someone who brought out the best in me. And as we sat there, I realized that not only had I moved on from Judy, but I was finally ready to build something new, something better. A few months later, I decided to introduce Claire to my family. They'd known about her, of course, and they'd seen the change in me, but this would be the first time she'd meet them in person. I'll admit, I was nervous. My family had been there through the whole ordeal with Judy, and they were naturally protective. But Claire, she handled it with grace, chatting easily with my mom, helping my dad in the kitchen, making everyone feel at ease. She fit in seamlessly, like she'd been part of the family all along. At one point, my mom pulled me aside, a knowing smile on her face. "You know, Matt," she said, looking over at Claire laughing with my dad, "I haven't seen you this happy in a long time. She's good for you. Don't let this one go." Her words stuck with me, and I knew she was right. After dinner, Claire and I took a walk through the neighborhood, hand in hand, both of us quiet and content. The stars were out, and everything felt calm, like the world was finally starting to make sense. "Your family's wonderful, Matt," Claire said, giving my hand a squeeze. "Thank you for sharing them with me." I looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through me. "They loved you." "I knew they would," I replied. And in that moment, standing there in the dark, I knew that Claire wasn't just someone I wanted to share my life with. She was someone I couldn't imagine my life without. A few days later, I made up my mind. I'd been holding onto an old engagement ring I'd bought after Judy and I got married, a family heirloom my mom had given me for when the time was right. It had stayed hidden in a drawer all these years, like a ghost from a past I couldn't let go of. But now, I knew it was time to let go of that past for good. I went to a jeweler and picked out a new ring, something simple and elegant, just like Claire. That evening, I took her out to the river again, to the spot where we'd talked about our future. As we stood there watching the water, I took her hands in mine, my heart racing, and told her how much she meant to me, how she'd shown me what love really was. Then I got down on one knee. "Claire, you changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You taught me how to trust again, how to love again. Will you marry me?" She stared at me, tears welling up in her eyes, before she nodded, a smile breaking through. "Yes, Matt. 1,000 times yes." We laughed, cried, and held each other under the stars, and for the first time, I knew without a doubt that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Everything I'd been through, every hardship, every heartbreak, had led me here, to this moment with Claire, to a love that felt like home. As we made our way back, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me, the kind I hadn't felt in years. The pain of the past had finally loosened its grip, and all that was left was the bright promise of the future, of a new life I'd built, one step at a time, with someone who truly saw me. And I knew that, in the end, forgiveness and letting go hadn't just set Judy free, it had set me free too. After Claire and I got engaged, life felt like it had taken on a new light. Everything I'd gone through with Judy now felt distant, like the pages of an old book I'd finally finished reading. Claire and I were deep into planning our wedding, balancing work, and carving out our little routines as a couple. We'd spend our Sundays hiking trails just outside the city, grabbing coffee at our favorite spot, and dreaming up plans for the future home we wanted to build together. Captain Ray heard the news of our engagement through the grapevine, and he called me up not long after. He congratulated me in his gruff, straightforward way, and then he asked if I'd be willing to come over. He didn't say much else, but I could tell there was something on his mind. When I arrived, Captain Ray was sitting on his porch, looking out over the yard. He gestured for me to join him, his expression unusually somber. After a few moments of silence, he looked at me and said, "Matt, there's something I wanted to ask you." "Anything, Ray," I replied, not sure where this was going. He took a deep breath and finally said, "Would you be willing to invite Judy to the wedding?" The request caught me off guard. I hadn't thought much about her since the day I'd met Ben. Part of me wanted to say no outright, to keep the past firmly where it belonged. But Captain Ray's eyes held this quiet plea, a hope that maybe we could all find closure together. I knew it took a lot for him to ask this of me. And truthfully, I owed him a lot. He'd been there for me through my darkest days. So, after a long pause, I nodded. "If Judy wants to come, Ray, she's welcome." He gave me a nod of thanks, his shoulders relaxing a little, and I knew it meant a lot to him. After that, we fell into easy conversation, talking about everything but the wedding and Judy, just like old friends. A few weeks later, I got a text from Judy. She asked if I had a moment to talk, and I agreed. We met at a small park, sitting on a bench under the shade of an oak tree. She congratulated me on the engagement, her words genuine, her smile a little sad. I didn't think I'd be invited, she admitted quietly, glancing down at her hands. But thank you, Matt. I don't know if I deserve it, but it means a lot. I shrugged, feeling a sense of calm. It's in the past, Judy. I think we've both come a long way. We talked about Ben, who, from what she told me, was steady and kind, the sort of person who brought out the best in her. She seemed genuinely happy, and for the first time, I felt only relief, no anger or resentment. She was building her own life, one separate from me, and I'd finally reached the point where I could be happy for her. Then she asked me something that surprised me. Matt, do you really forgive me? For everything. I thought about it for a moment, feeling the weight of all the years between us. Yeah, Judy. I do. I don't think either of us were the people we needed to be back then. But we're different now. I've moved on, and I'm happy. That's what matters. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, and gave me a small smile. Thank you, Matt. I don't know if I could have ever moved on without that. When we said goodbye, it felt final, not in a painful way, but in a way that signaled the true end of a chapter. I watched her walk away, and it was like watching the last of my old wounds fade, leaving behind only the scar to remind me of what I'd survived. The day of the wedding was beautiful. Claire looked radiant, and as I stood at the altar waiting for her, I felt nothing but joy. When she reached me, she took my hand and gave it a squeeze, a silent reassurance that we were in this together, now and always. Judy came, as promised. She kept her distance, sitting toward the back with Captain Ray. I caught her eye only once, and she gave me a small nod, her face relaxed and at peace. I felt grateful that she'd come, grateful that we could share this moment without bitterness or regret. It was like a final blessing on the life we'd each chosen to leave behind. After the ceremony, Claire and I danced under the open sky, surrounded by family, friends, and all the people who had stood by me through everything. I pulled her close, and as we swayed to the music, I whispered, "Thank you, Claire, for helping me find my way back to this." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "We're just getting started, Matt." And she was right. In that moment, I felt the fullness of a future I could finally embrace, a life built not on hurt, but on trust, on love, on hope. The pain of the past was gone, replaced by a future I was truly ready for, with a woman who had helped me find my way back to happiness. As we danced, I looked out at the people around us and realized I'd found my peace, and more importantly, I'd found my way home. After the wedding, life with Claire took on this beautiful, easy rhythm. We moved into a house just outside the city, with big windows and a view of the mountains, the kind of place I'd always imagined settling down in. Claire brought warmth and laughter into that home, filling every corner with reminders that I'd made it to the other side of all that pain. I finally felt like I could breathe, like I'd truly stepped into a life I'd fought so hard to find. One evening, Claire and I sat out on the back porch, wrapped up in blankets, watching the sun dip behind the hills. She was resting her head on my shoulder, her fingers laced through mine, when she quietly asked, "Have you thought about starting a family?" I glanced down at her, caught a hint of excitement and a little nervousness in her eyes. Truthfully, I'd always dreamed of having kids, of being the kind of dad who'd show up at every game, every recital, and who'd be there no matter what. But after everything I'd been through with Judy, I'd put those dreams on hold, not sure if I'd ever be ready to open myself up to that kind of vulnerability again. But with Claire, I didn't feel fear. I felt possibility, hope. I saw a future where I could give my kids something real, a stable, loving home, something I hadn't even realized I was capable of building until Claire showed me that I could. "Yeah," I finally said, turning to meet her gaze. "I'd love that, Claire. I want to start a family with you." The smile she gave me was everything. It was a promise, a vision of a life we were going to build together, one that I'd never dared to hope for before. That night, as we sat out under the stars, we talked about our dreams, about what kind of parents we wanted to be, and all the little moments we wanted to share with our kids. A few months later, Claire came to me, her face glowing, her smile barely contained. She held up a pregnancy test, her eyes wide with a mix of joy and disbelief. "We're going to be parents, Matt," she whispered, and in that moment, everything fell into place. I pulled her into my arms, feeling this incredible surge of gratitude, of pride, of purpose. The next 9 months flew by in a blur of excitement and preparation. I painted the nursery walls a soft blue, put together a crib, and Claire and I spent hours picking out names, imagining who this little person would become. I found myself looking forward to every kick, every little sign that our family was growing. And then one early morning, we rushed to the hospital, hands clasped tight, hearts racing. Hours later, Claire gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. The nurse placed him in my arms, and as I looked down at him, his tiny hands curled up, his face peaceful and new, I felt a rush of love so strong it nearly took my breath away. We named him Ethan. As I sat beside Claire, holding our son, I felt every piece of my life come together in a way I hadn't thought was possible. All the pain, the mistakes, the heartache, it had led me here to this moment, to this family I was holding in my arms. For the first few weeks, life was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and new routines. Claire and I learned together, figuring out how to be parents one step at a time. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, just to check on Ethan, to make sure he was okay, to marvel at the fact that he was ours. One afternoon, as I was rocking Ethan to sleep, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. I thought about Judy, about the life we'd once planned, and how different things had turned out. I felt no bitterness, only gratitude. Without those experiences, without that painful journey, I might never have become the man I was now, holding my son, ready to give him the life I'd always dreamed of. I wondered if Captain Ray had ever felt this way, if he'd looked at Judy as a baby with the same hope and determination. He'd been a father figure to me, a steady presence who'd stood by me even when his own daughter had caused me pain. I made a silent promise to myself, and to Ray, to give my son that same stability, that same unshakable love. Later that day, as Claire rested, I called Ray. I hadn't spoken to him much since the wedding, but I felt a strong need to reach out to him now, to tell him about Ethan. "Ray," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I'm a dad now. We have a son." Ray's voice softened on the other end of the line, filled with pride and a warmth that said more than words ever could. "Congratulations, Matt. I always knew you'd be a great father. That boy is lucky to have you." Hearing those words, I felt a calm, a peace that settled deep within me. I thanked him, both for his support and for his quiet example of resilience and strength. We talked for a while about the challenges and joys of parenthood, and when I hung up, I felt this unshakable certainty that I could do this, that I'd finally built the life I'd always wanted. That night, as I held Claire close and watched Ethan sleep in his crib, I felt a profound sense of contentment, a peace I hadn't even realized I was searching for. All the anger, all the resentment, all the weight of the past was gone, replaced by a love I couldn't have imagined in my darkest days. I kissed Claire's forehead, whispering, "Thank you for everything. You've made me whole." She smiled, leaning into me, her voice soft. "No, Matt. You made yourself whole. I just got lucky enough to be a part of it." Looking at the two of them, I knew that, finally, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The years that followed were filled with the kind of moments I'd once only dreamed of, watching Ethan take his first steps, hearing his first words, and sharing all those milestones with Claire by my side. Our home became a place of laughter and warmth, and every time I looked around, I felt nothing but gratitude for the life we'd built. Captain Ray became a regular visitor, showing up with little gifts for Ethan, spoiling him with stories and teaching him how to fish. It felt good to see him there, a steady presence in my son's life, just as he'd been in mine. Judy would sometimes come by too, usually for family gatherings or birthdays. She'd settled into her own life with Ben, and each time we saw her, there was only peace between us, a silent understanding that we'd both found our way. One evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes and asked, "Daddy, were you always happy?" I paused, taken off guard by his question. I thought about how to answer, and finally I told him no, buddy, not always. But I found my way to happiness. "And you and Mommy, you're a big part of why." He nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep, his little hand clutching mine. I sat there for a moment longer, feeling the quiet joy of that moment, realizing that all the pain, all the struggles, had led me here, to this simple, perfect life. As I turned out the light and headed downstairs, I found Claire waiting for me with a soft smile. She wrapped her arms around me, and I held her close, knowing that everything I'd ever needed was right here. The past was gone, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd truly come home.
Bye.